Inside the perfect home, the perfect crime.
There were no eyewitnesses to the actual murder.
The evidence is all circumstantial.
Sometimes you recover a weapon, you recover a set of fingerprints, which are conclusive, but not in this case.
Police have a prime suspect, but it will be a tough case to prove.
Prosecutors didn't think it would stand up to a jury scrutiny.
Investigators want to bring a 10-year-old cold case back to life. Can the experts at North Mission Road help make it happen? They call it the South Bay, an upper-middle-class area on Santa Monica Bay. Clean air, good schools, and quiet neighborhoods make it one of the better places to live in Los Angeles County. One autumn evening, Shawn Bradford and her brother Jason were driving to their mother's home. The house had just been sold. Their mother, Joan, had asked for help moving some boxes.
Joan was an extremely caring mother, didn't have an enemy in the world. She was just your typical all-American mom.
Shawn and Jason came in a little after 7 p.m. They called their mother. No answer. Then Shawn looked in the living room.
When Shawn found her mother's body, she was bleeding from numerous gunshot wounds.
Shawn ran to one of the neighbors, a trained nurse, for help. It was too late. At 7:35 p.m., Joan Bradford was pronounced dead. Police and LA coroner investigator Fred Corral were sent to the scene.
When I arrived at the scene there, I met with the police officers, and they told me she was found earlier that evening by the daughter.
Even now, some 2 decades later, investigator Corral remembers what he first saw.
She'd been dead for 5 to 6 hours, which was consistent with the information that the police had given me.
Corral didn't know it at the time of the murder, but his analysis many years later would be key to solving the case. Using a mannequin and a model of the living room, he reconstructs the crime scene.
What we're looking at here is a representation of the living room where the decedent was found in. The first thing I saw, I noted a contact wound. The contact wound, what I mean by that is the actual muzzle touching the back of the skin, and there appear to be powder burns in the outline of the weapon. She also had another one right above the chest area. She had 2 in the back also.
Someone had shot Joan a total of 5 times.
Like an execution style type murder.
Corral finished his examination of the body and moved on to the rest of the crime scene.
In between her feet, I found a silver tip. It appeared to be a .38 caliber projectile.
Corral gave both bullets to detectives and prepared the body for the 30-minute ride to North Mission Road. At the same time, investigators interviewed the neighbors. While nothing had been seen, things had been heard. Not long after 7 p.m.
You had some witnesses who heard the gunshots. You had witnesses who heard some rustling of the neighbor's property, some evidence that a plant had been trampled in the neighbor's yard.
Had Joan surprised a burglar who shot her and then fled? As detectives considered that possibility, Joan's daughter, Shawn, made a shocking charge.
Shawn says, "You need to look at my dad. They're going through a very bitter divorce. I think my dad is involved in this case."
Bill Bradford had a sterling reputation in the neighborhood and a high-level security clearance at a major defense firm where he worked.
Bill was a guy who, according to his supervisors, was the best engineer they'd ever had. He was absolutely first-rate, a guy who did outstanding work and was very well respected within the company.
Detectives immediately tried to find him. But when they went to his apartment, he wasn't there. Had he taken with him the answer to this mystery? A mother of 3 has been murdered. The victim's daughter suspects her father. But nothing in Bill Bradford's past indicates he's capable of murder.
Bill Bradford was known as an extremely competent, highly organized engineer.
Despite police efforts to locate him, Bradford could not be found.
They ran his firearms records and determined that he had a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum.
Detectives searched his apartment. Before long, they found an empty box for a .357 Magnum.
They found no ammunition for .357. So immediately, detectives were very suspicious. That was Friday night, Saturday morning.
As police kept hunting for Bradford, Joan's autopsy was underway at North Mission Road. The medical examiner carefully measured the angle and depth of her wounds, looking at the pathways made by the bullets.
There were 5 gunshot wound tracks, and 4 of them were fatal.
The medical examiner paid special attention to the contact wound, where the gun was pressed against Joan's neck.
There was soot present and discoloration in the underlying tissue. It exited on the left side of the neck.
This was what the coroner's investigator had called the execution shot. During the autopsy, the medical examiner recovered 3 bullets. The other 2 had been found at the crime scene.
All the bullets recovered appeared to be of a similar caliber and bullet type, which might indicate that one weapon was used.
A sheriff's department ballistics expert determined that all the bullets were the same make. Winchester silver tips. But have they all been fired from a single gun? That answer depended on the so-called rifling characteristics or signature marks left on the bullet when it exits the barrel of a gun.
We determined the number of lands and groove that were in the barrel of the firearm and that marked the bullet.
Grooves are the curving shallow channels in the gun barrel. Lands are the raised areas between the grooves.
We measured the widths of the land impressions and the groove impressions that are left on the bullets.
These marks, the signature of the firearm, were cross-referenced with a database of gun models. Soon it became clear that only a few guns could have produced marks like these. One of them was the same kind of gun owned by Bill Bradford, a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum. But why would a respected professional want to execute his own wife? Detectives had a theory.
The day before the murder, Bill gets a call from his real estate agent, and the real estate agent basically says, hey, listen, your wife and her lawyer have just come in and they have garnished $40,000.
Joan's attorney had taken part of Bill Bradford's house sale profits, claiming unpaid child support. Bradford was furious.
He was angry at his wife. He had been angry at her for a very long time. And for Mr. Bradford to be told that more of his money that he's worked so hard for was going to be going to her, he was so angry that he felt that what mattered was taking out his rage.
The web of evidence was tightening around Bradford. But where was he?
Officers attempted to leave messages and to locate him on Friday night, on Saturday night, and even on Sunday.
Then, 2 days after the murder, Bradford unexpectedly surfaced.
On Sunday morning, Bill Bradford walks into the police department in Torrance. They had left the police, which they're required to do whenever they search a location. They basically will leave notifications saying, "We have come, executed this search warrant, this is what we've taken, and please contact us."
Bradford said that yes, he'd been upset over the $40,000 garnishment, but he denied killing his wife.
Well, I'm sorry to see her dead, but we never had a very good relationship. But it's sad to see anybody die.
He claimed to have spent 2 whole nights at the Redondo Beach Pier to deal with his thoughts. He even had an alibi.
He produced a parking stub from the computerized time clock showing that he'd arrived at the pier at 7:29 p.m. Friday evening.
Shots had been heard at the Bradford house sometime after 7 p.m. It was impossible, Bradford claimed, to shoot his wife, climb over the fence, flee to a distant car, and drive to the pier by 7:29.
He slept in his car Friday night and Saturday night. There was nobody at the ticket booth when he left, so he still had the stub.
The cops didn't believe it. Bradford was arrested and held without bail while detectives searched for more evidence. Days went by. Nothing turned up. They had no witnesses, murder weapon, or other hard evidence. Their suspect even had an alibi. Authorities came to a difficult crossroads.
Prosecutors didn't think it would stand up to a jury scrutiny.
The decision was made at that point that there was not enough evidence.
Bradford walked out of jail a free man. Even his own children suspected he killed their mother. So did the police. Would it ever be proved? Or was Bill Bradford getting away with murder? The murder of Joan Bradford is unsolved. Her husband, Bill, is the prime suspect. But without hard evidence, the case has gone cold. For 10 years, no one is arrested.
There wasn't really hard, solid forensic evidence like fingerprints, blood, DNA evidence, witnesses. Instead, you had a very circumstantial case that had been presented once before to a district attorney years ago, and it wasn't compelling enough to get it filed.
In 2001, a new cold case task force was started by the Los Angeles County District Attorney. They would take a fresh look at old, unsolved cases.
I love circumstantial cases. When I saw the Bradford case, it just jumped out at me. I immediately thought that that was a case that we could successfully prosecute.
This was sort of a test case for this cold case task force. And it was a very tough case being so circumstantial, but they felt it was important enough to bring justice that they kind of put it on the line.
10 years earlier, the original team of prosecutors didn't think they could get a conviction based on the existing evidence. But Lewin's new cold case unit felt there was enough. In a bold move, they filed murder charges against Bill Bradford.
It was important that the family have a chance at closure and that a jury be presented with the evidence. And if they decided that we didn't have it, then so be it.
They would first need to break Bradford's alibi. The ticket from the pier parking lot stamped 7:29 p.m. on the night of the murder.
The defense in the case from the start was, you don't have any evidence my guy did it, and even if you do, he couldn't have done it because he was at the pier, and here's his parking stub.
To break the alibi, Lewin retraced the events of Joan's murder that occurred between 7 and 7:29 p.m.
Sometime between 7 and 7:15, neighbors hear gunshots.
A neighbor immediately looked towards the house. She didn't see anyone leaving.
But she heard from the backyard what sounded like rustling, as if somebody was going over the back fence, and heard the sound of a dog barking. The killer had left out the back, went through the gate to the adjoining street, and then drove away.
But could Bradford then drive to the pier in under 15 minutes? Lewin had a detective recreate the 3-mile trip.
The detective took his car at the same time of evening. The streets in the area had not changed, and at the speed limit drove to the location.
They drove it again and again. The trip never took more than 8 minutes. Even if the shots had been heard as late as 7:15, Bradford had ample time to get into the pier parking lot. But showing he could have killed his wife might not convince a jury. And Bradford's attorneys maintained she was shot by a burglar she discovered in her house.
And the burglar is stunned, happens to be carrying a weapon, and then shoots his way out of the scene so he's not caught.
The prosecution needs to prove that Bill Bradford himself was the gunman. Without any witnesses, fingerprints, or murder weapon. They devised a plan. Part of it would rely on the evidence gathered a decade earlier by the experts from North Mission Road. The trial of Bill Bradford is underway. To convict him, prosecutors needed to debunk the contention that a burglar killed his wife, Joan. Their strategy hinges on one basic premise.
If we could show that the shot to the back of the neck had happened in a certain point in the room, it might be inconsistent with a burglar having been surprised.
They enlisted the help of crime reconstruction expert Ron Linhart.
I got involved to see if it were possible to reconstruct the order of the 5 gunshot wounds that the victim had received and determine the relative locations of the assailant and the victim.
Linhart worked with the original North Mission Road files that were crucial to the case.
You'll look at the coroner's photographs of wounds, of individual wounds, at the time that the autopsy is done. And you're looking for angles. You're looking for some evidence at what position the victim is in when fired upon.
By studying the bullet trajectories and all the other evidence, a sequence of events began to emerge, helping illustrate who killed Joan Bradford.
The first 2 shots had occurred when the assailant was right near the front door, and where Joan was further into the house and was turning away.
Joan staggered away. Forensic evidence showed that the killer followed her and shoved the gun against the back of her neck.
Gunshot 3.
The barrel was right up against the skin when the weapon was fired, like an execution-style type murder.
The bullet passed through Joan's neck, hit a cardboard box, and was later found on the floor. Its low-flying trajectory meant Joan was already down, completely incapacitated. There was no reason for the assault to go on, but it did.
And the 2 final shots were delivered to her left back and side from a range of 1 to 2 feet.
Those were shots of hatred fired by somebody who had highly emotionally charged issues with the victim. And it was not a burglar.
An armed burglar probably would have fired only once or twice and fled.
This sequence of gunshots is not consistent with a surprised burglar seeking to escape.
Only one man hated Joan Bradford that much: her former husband. The evidence was presented at the trial. Almost 14 years after Joan Bradford was found dead in her home, Bill Bradford was found guilty of murder. The sentence, 26 years to life.
I think that the Bradford children felt that no matter what happened, this wasn't a win-win situation. They lost their mother, they lost their father, and it's really just an unfortunate circumstance, no matter how you look at it.
The Bradford Family Mystery, a story of rage, murder, and delayed justice. Another case from the files of the Los Angeles County Coroner.